Well, good evening.
Good evening.
We're starting a little late, but you know what? Sometimes it
That's
happens.
right.
It happens. Well, I'm glad you're here. Sister Georgia is still in Santa Fe. My wife will be heading home soon, I hope. I haven't heard from her, so hopefully they let her out from the prison again tonight. And some others I haven't.
Oh, Trina can't, she's hurting bad.
Trina, we need to keep Trina in prayer. Tanisha, the kids, probably won't be here unless they come in a little late. Two of her kids tested, had strep throat. The other two didn't this weekend, but who knows? So they may still be recuperating and recovering. Praise reports. Something good that's happened. We've had some good rain.
Yes, we
Okay.
have.
Stop. I told you to go off. Talking to the music. Okay.
We had one day last week, except that the Lord just prayed for him to hear her.
Praise God. You know, we need to keep people in California in prayer. They've got hit with the storms. We've got people in Florida getting hit with the storms. We need to pray for them. But at the same time, we need to understand that this increase in these things is God's word being fulfilled, and we got a job to do because it won't be long. He'll be coming. You know, of course, what is long in our books and long in his books are two different things, but prophecy is being fulfilled right in front of our eyes.
Yep.
Any other praise reports? Well, that's true, Maui as well, yes. I heard what started that.
Yeah,
What did you hear?
The electric company's power line started it.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
But then they faulted the fire department that showed up because they didn't stick around to make sure it was out completely. They left too soon and it got away from them. And that came out on the news report that the electric company over there said, our power line, something went wrong and it started the fire, but they didn't stick around long enough to make sure it was out, and look what happened. So yes, let's keep those people in prayer as well. I forgot about Maui temporarily.
Wow.
And the people that died recently,
We've got a lot of those incidents around the world,
Yeah,
around the
there's quite a
nation.
few.
Yes.
Yep.
So, what happened in California?
Hillary paid them a visit.
Cyclone Hillary.
A tropical
Oh, yeah,
storm
I heard
named
about
Hillary,
that.
not the former
I think I
president's
heard
wife.
that. Yep.
Cyclone.
Okay,
Yeah.
my praise report, I guess you could say, is, I thought, like I explained to you, my phone, I thought it was kaput because it will not charge, and my chargers didn't do anything. So I went and bought a phone, and I decided to go to Dollar Tree, got a cheap charger. It's slower than Moses, but it's working, so I'm making a decision to take my other phone back, get my money back, possibility.
If your phone goes dead and doesn't charge, before you throw out your phone, and I learned this with some electronics here at the church, check the charger first. Those charging boxes will go out on you once in a while.
I've had that happen before.
So, like I say, I checked it with my other phone and it charged, they charged right away. So it could have been, maybe I did something on the little leaky inside here when you plug that deal in.
That
That could
happens.
happen. Yep.
And I just happened to get one that tightened up in there and touched it, but slower than Moses.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
Because it don't belong with that. I mean, it fits the phone, but it didn't come with the phone.
Hmm.
The charging back, cords go out. And so
Charging
it's-
cords go out.
Oh, yeah.
Those wires are very thin inside there. It doesn't take
That's
much to
right.
break one. And yes.
I had one happen.
Be in prayer. Those a week from Sunday, Children's Church will kick off, and it's going to take a little while to get it running smoothly, but we're going to do this, and I think we're gonna see some good results from it. It's gonna take some time, it's gonna take a little while to get traction, get it going, but, looking forward to it. Again, if you know some families with kids and they're not going to church, you might want to take them one of these. And, so, I will leave them right here, just so I don't knock them off tonight.
I got 3 of those, and I plan on taking one across the street to the neighbor, but it doesn't mean that they're gonna do anything tight.
Our job is to invite. If they don't come, that's between them and God.
It's on the parents.
It's on
That's
them.
right.
Any other prayer
I
requests?
need special prayer for my sister, and then they just went to Albuquerque. Her boyfriend's gonna have something with his kidney. He's gonna have, he only has one kidney, and he's going for a checkup.
Check, okay, we'll keep them in
I
prayer.
need a safe travel back when they come back on Monday.
All right?
Right from Matthew, he hurt his shoulder. He's been working so hard, no rest, so strengthen himself somehow.
And Tuesday, he's got to start his job. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Keep them in prayer. You've heard me
You
mention,
probably heard him, I'll ask him. How will he move in the massage chair?
probably, yeah, that would be
Because that
ironic.
thing's heavy.
That thing's heavy.
Oh,
You've heard me mention Justin and Marissa this time. They're Michael and Caitlin's co-workers, and Justin's technically the boss. Keep them in prayer. She has had trouble all through her pregnancy. She's still got a few weeks to go, but they were at the hospital in Clovis almost all night last night, and they had to keep her from starting labor too soon. So keep them in prayer. She's had a very rough pregnancy, so keep her in prayer.
I can use prayers because of, well, I never experienced this before, but extra heavy duty anxiety and depression attack that I'm not experienced. Now today at Walmart, I felt really weird. I thought I was gonna go down, but I kept asking God to protect me and take care of me. He did. After I got out of Dollar Tree and everything, I was more relaxed and more just like I am now. But when that anxiety, I didn't know how bad anxiety attacks could hit. I'm just over. I'm trusting God to get me through whatever it is that's causing this thing. And there's a lot involved.
Anyone else? Katrissa's hand, yes. They're talking possibly another surgery and 6 more weeks in the cast that they do. And it's her right hand. She's right-handed. Yes.
He's had his skin and I believe he's like it tomorrow, so
All right.
he really needs prayer.
I have another one too. I'm going to the doctor on the 5th. I need prayers for the annual physical.
Okay?
Oh, and also Ronza.
Yes. Continue to just pray for the church family. There's a lot of needs. But at the same time, the members of this church family need to exercise greater faith. And it's easy for us to sit here and say, I trust God. But when we get out there, we've got to follow through on it. Okay?
That's right.
And the enemy's going to attack. He does.
He uses other people to do it.
That's right.
Sometimes we need to ask the good Lord to make us like Ronald Reagan. Mr. Teflon, don't let things stick to you.
Yep.
My understanding, Autumn's husband went to
Leroy?
work now, but still he could use prayer.
Here, again. Charlie, lead us in prayer. Let's jump into our study tonight.
Heavenly Father, thank you for the strength and blessings you give us every day. I pray with those that are in need of touch, healing. We pray that you touch them and give them a quick healing so that they can continue to work for you, Lord. Lift up all praise reports. And worthy of praise. We ask you to open our hearts and minds and souls to go into the study. We may learn what you have for us. In Jesus' wonderful name.
Amen. All right. here's the good news for you. In your papers tonight, there are no blanks to fill in. And this week it was on purpose, not an accident like it was last week. But you probably will, hopefully, take some notes.
One nice thing about the blanks, at least I can read it. Because I'm not usually reading my writing when I get it.
Oh,
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. All right, tonight's lesson, last week we talked up through the Tower of Babel and a little bit of what took place after the Tower of Babel when the people began to finally disperse and migrate around the globe. And tonight we're just going to look from Babel to Abram. Now, don't get confused. How many of you remember that his name was Abram before it was Abraham?
Yep.
I mean, remember his name, her name, what was his wife's name originally?
Sarah.
Sarai.
Sarah.
Sarai, and then it became Sarah. And again, that's because in that culture and the way God dealt with many people and all through time was names were given to mean things. In fact, in my reading today, my private devotional reading, I came across something that was talking about the kind of men that Jesus called to be his disciples. And who was the tax collector? That wasn't his name originally. What was his name originally? He was named after one of the 12, the fathers of the 12 tribes. His name was actually Levi. But when God called him, he gave him a new name. He said, "No, you're Matthew," and that's a new name. What about who's the one that we always talk about that I say is one of my favorite of the 12 because he can open mouth and insert both feet right into the kneecaps? Well, we call him Peter, but the reality of it is his name was Simon, and Jesus changed his name to Peter. Here's the thing. When we really begin to follow Christ and we accept him as Lord and Savior, we may not have to go change our birth certificate name, but can I tell you, he in his books gives us a new name. Now the thing is are you living up to that new name? All right. From Babel to Abram. Now we're on the 6th lesson of this study of the Bible and world history. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide. Boy, I'm slipping. There we go. It's a much prettier picture, right?
Yep.
Here's the thing. We're on the 11th and the beginning of the 12th chapter of Genesis. And I know this is the 6th lesson, and you're like, Pastor, if we're going to really go through all of basically Old Testament history, at least, man, we're still back there. We're not getting very far. But how much time have we have covered from creation to this point? Somewhere in the neighborhood, 2,000 years. Bless you, bless you, bless you.
I was going to say about 2000.
All right. I want you to catch this. I want you to understand this because I want you to be better Bible readers. I want you to be more literate when it comes to reading the Bible and understand that what you can read over the course of a few seconds or a few minutes may be sharing what happened over the course of a long time span. All right? So find Genesis 11. Chapter 11, starting in verse 10. And we're not going to cover very many verses, but we are going to be covering hundreds of years. Hundreds of years in this. All right. The first part of chapter 11 is the story of the Tower of Babel. And we come down to verse 10, and it says, this is the account of Shem. Now, first of all, who is Shem?
Son of Adam.
Not
Adam.
No.
Son
of Noah.
Noah.
And why is Shem so important in the biblical story? Jesus came from the line of Shem. And in fact, the Jews trace it back to Abraham, but the truth is, they actually get one of their names from Shem, because Shem is the root word of the word Semitic. Alright? So it says, this is the account of Shem. 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. And after he became the father of Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Arphaxad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And after he became the father of Shelah, Arphaxad lived 403 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And when Shelah lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. And after he became the father of Eber, Shelah lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. Do you notice something that's happening here? Compared to the genealogies we looked at in prior lessons. They're having their children
Earlier.
younger and earlier,
Wow.
and
They've been
Children should-
they're not living lives nearly as long. All right? Verse 16. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg. And after he became the father of Peleg, Eber lived 430 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And when Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu. And after he became the father of Reu, Peleg lived 209 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Reu lived 32 years, he became the father of Serug. And after he became the father of Serug, Reu lived 207 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Serug had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor. And after he became the father of Nahor, Serug lived 200 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. And after he became the father of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and had other sons and daughters. Let's stop there a moment. Betty, your mom's 104. How old was she when her first child was born? 15 or 16. Okay.
Wow.
In our day and age, and the fact that Beta's 104, we look at her, and not to be disrespectful, we say she's really old.
She's up there.
Compared to what people usually live today. We're like, my goodness, 104. In the earlier genealogies before the flood, at 104, we would have said, what? She's
a child, a kid.
just a kid.
Yeah.
You're only 104? You're just getting started, lady, right? Now, in this time frame, after the flood, after the Tower of Babel, and as people began to disperse over the globe, they're still living a long time compared to us, but it's not nearly as long as it had been. Okay? So we get down here, and let's go ahead and read all the scripture, then we'll go into our notes. And when Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. And after he became the father of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and had other sons and daughters. After Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
That makes me have a little, were they triplets?
No, they figured probably not. And the reason being is because when we calculate the numbers, see, you're getting me to go into something I wanted to avoid.
Okay.
There are those that read this part of Scripture, the end of chapter 11 and the beginning of chapter 12, and they say, aha, we caught the Bible in a contradiction. Because in a moment we're going to see that it says that Abraham left where he was and went to the land God told him to go to at age 75. But if we calculate the numbers, they go, there's no way. His daddy was 70 when he had him. And they calculate the numbers and they say, Abraham had to be at least 130. So the Bible's all wrong. No, the reality of it is, keep this in mind, and I'll drill this into you time and time again. Who was Terah's oldest child? Look at that list.
Abram.
Probably not. Why is Abram listed first? And we'll talk about it in a minute. Because he's the most important one to the story that God is sharing in His Word. Again, please keep in mind, in biblical narrative, in Hebrew narrative, the oldest is not always put first on the list.
Right.
And we'll talk about it in a minute. Let's finish the scripture.
Wow.
And Terah had lived 7 years and became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And this is the account of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. And while his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was married and had no children. And Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. He has a son named Haran. They go to a city named Haran. Don't let that confuse you. There is a person and a city. The city was not named after the son. The city was already in existence long before him. Okay? And Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. Now again, before we jump into chapter 12, for the first 5 verses, what is something else we have learned about the book of Genesis? It's not always in chronological order. Okay? As a matter of fact, there are people who try to take Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 and say, well, see, there the Bible contradicts itself because it gives 2 creation stories. No. Hebrews, people of Hebrew culture, and ancient Hebrew culture especially, had a tendency to tell the big story and then jump back in time and tell you about one particular part of the story. Okay, Joyce, I was just sharing with you what we were discussing back here about trips and vacations, and I told you the big part, but then I jumped back in and told you about a specific little part. Doesn't mean I was telling you 2 different stories. I just told you the overall, then I told you about one specific. And that's what the Hebrew people in their ancient writings that we call the Old Testament and other ancient writings of theirs, that's what they did a lot. They tell you the big story, and you think, okay, good, they're done with that story, let's move on. And they say, no, wait, let me go back though and tell you what happened here during that big story. Let me tell you about one little part of it, and give more detail. Okay? Let me think. All right, most of you, maybe not all of you, most of you know that before I started pastoring full-time, I was a youth pastor part-time, and I worked for an engineering firm. Now, I could start to tell you about my time working for that engineering firm and tell you about, I was there about 6 years, and tell you what I did. And you might think, okay, Pastor, now move on with your life story, but I might want to go back and tell you about 2 or 3 specific things that happened to me during that time I worked for that company. Okay? That's what's happening here. Moses, when he wrote this, he says, here's what happened, here's all these people that lived, let me give you the family tree, because he's moving towards a specific point of the most important character in the book of Genesis. Do you understand that? Abram, who will become Abraham, he's the most important character in the book of Genesis. Okay? Why? Because that's the man that God called and said, I'm going to make of you the great nation that the Savior will come from. All right? So he gets to the end of verse, and he just finishes it out. This one was born, he was this age, he had this kid, he had more kids, he died at this age. And he just does it, so he ends that genealogy with that last verse in chapter 11. He says, Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. Now, what happens in the very next verse, first verse of chapter 12, is not the chronological continuing of the story. He says, now, let me go back now, let me tell you about the man I've been waiting to tell you about. Let me tell you about Abram. Okay, does everybody understand what I'm saying? Is anybody lost? If you're lost, you need to say so, because I can't read your mind. All right? And you will, there are people literally, in doing my research for this today, I literally found where people have written college academic papers about this little portion of Scripture, trying to explain the contradiction, and it's not that hard to explain. Moses says, listen, Terah did this and this, and Terah did this and this. One son died, and one son stayed, and the other son went with him, and he got so far in the journey, and then he died at this ripe old age of 205. He says, now, let me go back and tell you about Abram. So the Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you. And whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot, who was his nephew, went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran, and he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. And we'll go ahead, I didn't put this on there, but let me read verse 6, because it'll tie in with the map. And Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Again, when Abram left Haran and went into the land God told him to go to, did he just wander into this vast wilderness that was unoccupied?
No.
No, it was very much occupied. That's what we'll look at. All right. Here we see the family line of Shem become the main branch of humanity that the Bible will be most concerned with. All other people groups will only be mentioned as they become a part of the story of Shem's line, and even that was through his son Arphaxad. We don't know how many other kids he had. Again, the Bible started within the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. He created it all. And he comes down, he created it all, then he put man in a garden. And then man sinned, he kicked them out of the garden. And then man began to multiply, and they began to spread. And they sinned so greatly, rebelled so greatly, that finally after hundreds and hundreds of years, God did what? He destroyed everything except 8 people.
Wow.
Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives. They land, they come out, they begin to repopulate the earth. We looked at this last week. They began to spread out somewhat, but most of them got stuck in the Fertile Crescent again, in what we call Mesopotamia. And there they began to build the Tower of Babel. And what did God do there? He confused their language, and because of that, that forced them to begin to separate more. Because let's face it, if you don't understand somebody, you don't want to hang around them, am I right? Okay? So they began to spread out. Okay, let's not jump ahead. Here are the events and relevant information from the biblical perspective of this time between Babel and Abram becoming the key figure of the biblical narrative. Here is a note of interest. Now, I'm not telling you that I think this is true. I'm not telling you that it can't be true. I'm telling you what some other ancient writings say. There are ancient writings that make the claim that Abram spent time learning about the one true God directly from Noah and Shem. While this is possible, there's nothing in the Bible to confirm it. There's also nothing in the Bible to deny it. And if you'll go back, those of you that have been here for all the studies, if you go back to that page 7 of your study, and you look at the line, you'll find that when Abram was born, Noah and Shem were both still alive. Did he meet them? I don't know, because there's already thousands of people on the face of the earth at that time. All right. From Shem to Terah, Abram's father, there's 8 generations listed. That means that Abram was the 10th descendant from Noah. Now, let's calculate. I don't know if you like this. I like figuring this, okay? There's Abram. There's his daddy. And there's his grandpa. And his great-grandpa. 2 greats, 3 greats, 4 greats, 5 greats, 6 greats, 7. Noah was his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa.
7 greats.
7 greats. Now, let me ask you this question. Maddie, did you ever get to meet any of your great-grandparents?
No, just the grants.
Just your grand. Joanne, did you ever get to meet any of your great-grandparents? No. Connie? No. You did. Charlie? No. Eloy?
No.
Joyce? No. Do you meet any of your great-grandparents?
All of them.
All of them?
Every single one of them.
Okay, so you're outdoing me then. I got to meet all but two. One was, let me think. One, my mom's dad's dad was killed in a car accident when my grandfather was young. And then my mom's mom died about, when my mom was in high school, probably about 3 or 4 years before I was born. I got to meet all of my great-grandparents except those two. And the last of my great-grandparents didn't die until after my wife and I were married. So, but can you imagine? There is the possibility that Abram got to possibly meet his either 6th great or 7th great grandpas. Again, they lived a lot longer. Okay? I'm wanting to impress upon you the fact that in the first few chapters of Genesis, we actually cover almost as much time from the first 11 or 12 chapters of Genesis as the entire rest of the Old Testament covers. I'll let that sink in. 12 chapters cover as much time as the entire rest of the Old Testament covers. Okay? Alright, so here's what we can learn from the Bible. Terah lives in the city of Ur of the Chaldeans, where 3 sons are born to him, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. It's not clear from the biblical text what their birth order actually was, but it is assumed, and when I say something like that in this study, that it is assumed, I'm talking about it is assumed by Bible scholars and Bible teachers. You'll find others that will disagree with this. I happen to think they're pretty close to being right on. We don't know what the actual birth order was, but it is assumed that Haran was the oldest since he died first. Nahor was probably the middle child, so him and my wife would have gotten along just fine.
Yes.
And Abram was possibly the youngest of those 3. Now notice it doesn't say that's the only children he had. But of those 3, that's the assumption. They are listed in reverse order in the Bible because of importance in the biblical narrative. The Bible states that Terah was 70 when he fathered his first son, most likely Haran, and he was most likely around 130 when Abram was born. So the truth is, Haran may have been easily been possibly 60 years older than Abram. All right, they lived in a city called Ur. Ur was located in ancient Sumer, which is modern-day Iraq. The city's patron deity was called Nana, which is kind of ironic because I called my grandmother, my mom's mom, Nana, with only 2 N's in it, not 3. The Sumerian moon god. And below there, again, I'm spoiling you guys, I give you a little picture, an artist's depiction of the ancient city. Remember we talked last lesson about the ziggurats, those stair-step pyramids that are found all over the world? Well, if you notice here, they have found the ruins of the great ziggurat of Ur, and you'll notice it's in the picture on the right-hand side there. And this is where sacrifices would have been offered to Nana, their god, and the taxes and other offerings would have been collected for the city. Okay? All right, next stage. Haran dies in Ur. Terah makes the decision to move his family to Canaan, but he decides to settle in the city or the region of Haran. And again, yes, the city has the same name as his deceased son, but the city is not named for his son. The city was very old, much older than his son, okay? Extra biblical literature states that Abram's call from God to leave Ur was what prompted Terah to leave Ur, but he stopped the family short of their intended destination, reason unknown, except that he probably continued to be a worshiper of the pagan god of Ur, possibly multiple gods, and not the one true God that he called Abram. All right, can you all look at that map? And I know it's small, but do you see the city of Ur down towards the right-hand corner?
Yep.
All right, in my mind, and remember, I've been studying this stuff for a very long time. I don't know why, but I always pictured that he was in Ur and traveled southwest to Canaan. But that's not the case. If you look there, to get from where Ur was to Haran, they had to go northwest. And then Canaan would have been south of that. Why would they take that roundabout way instead of cutting straight across due west? This map doesn't show it real well, but if you
He's
still...
going through the desert.
Because you see that big open area out there to the left of Ur?
That's
That's the Arabian desert.
Yeah.
We don't even like to travel across the desert today in our air-conditioned cars with our big giant water jugs with us.
Along the Euphrates and stayed there.
They slid up around the Euphrates and Tigris and stayed there and stayed near the cities that had been built along the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. They stopped at Haran. All right? Terah remains in Haran until his death at the age of 205 years old. Now, understand the best explanation of this is that Abram and Sarai and Lot did not remain in Haran until Terah died. Abram received a call and knew about the one true God and had begun to serve the one true God. Apparently his father refused to give up his idols. So God released Abram and said, I'm calling you to leave your father's house, to leave behind your father's gods, to leave all that behind, and I want you to go to a land that I will show you. All right? So at age 75, Abram, who is once again called by God, takes his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, who had been Haran's son, and everything, I want you to notice those words from the Bible, everything that he has accumulated and acquired in possessions, livestock, and people while living in Haran, and he finally completes the journey to the land that I, God, will show you, traveling as far as Shechem to begin with. Ur and Haran were both very wealthy, industrialized cities that were on trade routes. They were very wealthy cities. They were not little poor backwater redneck towns. There was wealth to be had. They were affluent. There was a lot going on. We looked in the last couple of lessons, and we'll look a little bit here in this lesson. These people were intelligent. They had developed a very high culture, a very intellectual culture, a very mechanized culture as far as they didn't have gasoline motors and stuff, but they had developed a lot of inventions and a lot of technology that people were surprised to find out. As a matter of fact, if you study through history, you'll find out there were some things that ancient man had that was lost and rediscovered in the last few hundred years. How many of you perhaps grew up having to go to the little outhouse? Okay, I will tell you the history of this church. And I don't remember the exact timing of this. It was even before you two ladies were here, Connie and Joyce. This church didn't have indoor bathrooms. They had outhouses out back. And when they built a little parsonage in what we now call our little parking lot, and that's why there's a sinkhole there, because when they destroyed that little parsonage, they simply collapsed it into a hole underneath and they didn't compact it properly. We're still battling that a little bit. It's not as bad as it was. And I've had this story told to me. When they went to build that, the congregation that made up this church at that time nearly split over should the pastor's house have indoor plumbing, since the church building didn't. They put indoor plumbing in that church, or in that parsonage, And the first Sunday it was ready, I don't even know which pastor this was, so don't ask me. I can look at the list, I don't know which one it was. He got up and he told the people that day, if you need to use the facilities, you no longer have to go to the outhouses. We've left the front door unlocked, go use the indoor bathroom at the parsonage. Now, let me tell you something. When did indoor plumbing become a thing?
I was thinking like in the fall, like in the,
It's just,
Most people say, well, it came around 200, maybe 300 years ago at most. No. There are ancient civilizations that had indoor plumbing equal to or better than ours thousands of years ago. But somewhere along the line, that technology and that, it got lost.
Margaret died, but everybody.
No, it just got lost.
wow.
See, we're not evolving, folks. Humanity is devolving, and that's why I'm so anxious for Christ to come and get us out of this mess. So you understand, when we read the story of Abram and these early patriarchs, it's easy, and sometimes those of us who were raised in Sunday school as kids, our Sunday school lessons kind of contributed to this fallacy that we think, well, there's just this little group of people that we read about in the Bible, but no, at this time, the world was populated. There's things going on in what we now know as China. There were people over here, what we call North America. Columbus didn't discover it, okay? And even those that are part of the current native tribes that are here, you were here a lot sooner than Columbus, but even your ancestors may not have been the first ones to get over here, okay? There were people in South America, people in what we call India, probably people in what we call Australia, all of these places. They spread out way back then. There were a lot of people. Okay, Abram and his group didn't leave Haran and come sneaking into a desert that nobody was living in. They came into an area that was well populated. The Bible tells us this, and the Canaanites were in the land. And if you go back in your lessons, we talked about that those came from one of Noah's sons. All right, that's the biblical account. So what do we find out from history that was happening during this time? All right, as stated in this series already, outside historical sources for the time frame we're looking at are hard to come by, especially if one wishes to assign a specific date to certain activities and individuals. As a matter of fact, most of the sources I'm using, and the ones that I'm in most agreement with, tells us that Abram was born around 2200 BC. There are others that want to make it much later, by like 200 to 400 years later. I think some of them do that because they don't want to admit that there was a flood. Some of them don't want to admit that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt like they were. So around 2200 BC is when they began. All right. Listed below is a very short list of things that we can be fairly certain happened between Babel and Abram's early life. You're going to notice that most of them deal with Egypt, which is to be expected since the Egyptian dynasties were some of the earliest and most influential outside the area of the Fertile Crescent. You can go back to your last lesson and see what was going on in Mesopotamia and China during that time. We do know from the Bible, other ancient historical documents, and archaeology that man was migrating to the far ends of the earth, establishing cultures and dynasties of various sizes and levels of influence. We're going to rehash this because it was brought up. Charlie, where all have they found ziggurat or stair-step pyramids besides in Mesopotamia?
up and down this hemisphere,
Right.
this side.
What we call Mexico's, Central America, South America.
They're in Indonesia, on the island, a lot of the little islands.
A lot of the islands. Even in China, there are, if you look at some of the older Chinese architecture, even buildings they built that were not made out of stone or whatever, what is the basic concept? Stair step. Okay? There is, I should look this up. Here in America, or in the eastern part of the United States, there is a giant area that they used to think was somewhat natural, but they began to realize that you dig and they studied and done flyovers and done all that stuff we talked about. Instead, this is entirely man-made, and it's not a stair-step pyramid, but it is a built-up area with a large flat area. Forget now how many thousands upon thousands of acres, and it's now grown over with forests and fields and all this, but it was man-made, and they're trying to figure out, all right, where did it come from? They think that some of them that had either been down in the south of here, in what we call Mexico and South America, either migrated up there and built it, or they're not quite sure. They think, well, wait a minute, maybe they were there first and built that, and something happened to drive them away, and they traveled here. They're not sure, but it's ancient, it's old, it's man-made. Well, why is it that all these places scattered around the globe, why do you think they all had similar concepts and ideas of how to build things and how to build their monuments to their gods and their kings? How did that happen?
We're all related.
Because they all come from Shem, Ham, or Japheth. That's it. All right. Here are some of the things that were happening between the Tower of Babel time and the birth of Abram in his early life. First of all, iron objects were being manufactured. Why is that a big deal?
Metal smelting, where did it come from?
Yeah, they had to learn how to smelt iron. You don't dig iron up out of the ground.
No.
You've got to manufacture it. And what does it take to manufacture iron? A lot of heat. They had to figure out a way to generate a lot of heat. They didn't have natural gas like we do today that we know of.
What is it in coal?
Iron is made from iron ore, but it has to go through a smelting process to get rid of all the impurities and to harden it. And it takes extreme heat to do that. When we lived in Lawrenceburg, down south of us, it's now closed, there was a community that was owned by one of the big copper companies, Phelps Dodge, and they had a big smelter down there, and a lot of the men worked there. Unfortunately, it closed. I mean, it was good paying jobs and employed a lot of people, where they would take the raw copper ore and they would take it to the smelter, and there they would burn off the impurities and get it to where it could be pure copper to be used. We got a tour of it once, and in the lobby, they had a giant, and I can't remember what they called it. It was a piece of copper that was probably about 3 feet wide by about 3 feet tall, and it had two of the wings on it because they would hang on conveyor things to be moved. And it was what? About 3 inches thick? And the deal was that when you were on tour there, if you could lift that, they'd let you have it.
Oh, wow.
Did they call it an ingot?
Yes, ingot, maybe that's what they call it.
Ingot, yes.
No one ever walked out of there with that because it was extremely heavy. They weren't worried about that. But here's the thing, I'll tell you the kind of heat that it would take to purify the copper in the smelter. If you went to work there, how many of you wore shirts like I'm wearing now, some kind of a polo shirt that is made of polyester?
That was not nice.
Oh no, they said there was one guy that one day wore one, and he didn't realize it had that much polyester in it, and he was working by one of the ovens at the smelter, and the heat is so strong, the shirt literally just crumpled and melted to his body.
Yeah.
Ouch, yeah.
That's ugly.
Okay?
Ouch.
But understand this, we generate that kind of heat with natural gas and all these other gases. These people were doing it back in this time frame without that.
Were they using coal or something?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't around back then. I don't know if they have learned to burn coal yet or not. But they did it. All right, here's the next thing we know is going on.
Coal wouldn't get hot enough to do.
When you
Yeah, coal can.
Yeah.
Yeah, with bellows, what you do there is a big shot of oxygen, which causes the fire to run brighter. How many of you have ever used a gas stove or a Bunsen burner and you look at your flame? What's the hottest part of the flame? The blue tip is the hottest part of that flame. But there are ways to increase that gas to get it even hotter than that. I think it goes white when it gets super hot. I think it is. All right.
Ain't it when you turn it up, the burner deal higher too?
Well, yeah, more gas and more oxygen.
Yeah.
But these people were doing this back in the time frame when there are some that want to say, oh, they didn't really know much. All right. Upper and Lower Egypt were finally consolidated into one kingdom when Narmer, king of Upper Egypt, was victorious over the king of Lower Egypt. His name has been lost to history, thus uniting the two into one great kingdom or dynasty. Now, if you look at your little map, and I know it's little, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to save on ink. I didn't realize it would be quite that small. If you hear upper and lower, which do you think is probably, without looking at the map, which do you think is probably in the north? Upper Egypt or Lower Egypt?
Upper,
You think upper,
yeah.
but it's not.
It's lower.
What's the altitude?
Which direction? No. Yes, it is kind of the elevation. But which direction does the Nile River flow? It flows north.
No.
Now, note of interest, I give you. Unlike most rivers in the northern hemisphere, the Nile does not flow from north to south, but flows from south to north. From Upper Egypt to Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is higher in elevation than Lower Egypt, thus the designation for each being opposite what one would expect. It is also important to note that many rivers in the world do flow north during part of their journey due to terrain and elevation changes along their path. Now, I didn't put this in your notes, but I did find this online. How many rivers in the world do you think flow from south to north?
No idea, never.
We agree that most rivers flow from north to south, right?
Yeah.
How many flow from south to north, you think?
10. Oh, one for sure.
Well, according to what I saw, actually, around the world, there's actually approximately 250 of them that flow south to north. And that's because they're located in places, just like here in Egypt, where the elevation is such, it starts in the mountains and it doesn't drop off this way, it drops off this way. And it goes, of course, the Nile empties into the Mediterranean Sea. It's also during this time frame, from Babel to Abraham, and we talked about this before, this is kind of the catalyst for me doing this kind of study. Egypt builds the great pyramids of the pharaohs. Where are the three biggest pyramids found? In Egypt.
Right outside Cairo.
It's called Giza.
He's
Oh.
And there is a whole wonderful, now I know Charlie would really get into this because he and I both like engineering stuff. If you like engineering stuff, a study of the three pyramids at Giza is really interesting because of the way they were built, the preciseness of how they were positioned with the stars, everything about it is just mind-boggling. I mean, some of you don't how many of you ever used the term and said, I don't like this new math?
Oh,
How many of you ever said that? Or heard somebody say, can I tell you, there's no such thing as new math. People like the Egyptians were using what we call new math back then because they took a lot of geometry and algebra and trigonometry to do what they did. And they didn't have computers and calculators.
That we know
Huh?
it. That we know it.
Well, not the kind we have.
Oh, no, back on.
They might have had more toes than fingers. No, they didn't. All right.
Yeah.
Egypt builds the great pyramids. Who had the pyramids built? Don't give me names. I'm asking for a position or a title.
Pharaoh.
Pharaohs, which are the kings. Why did they have them built?
Because they were, leave a mark.
Well, it was going to be their final resting place, and they wanted to be remembered. But there's something else the Egyptians did during this time frame as well. They, and I put in quotes, they invented the process of embalming to mummify the deceased, specifically those of royal and wealthy classes. The average Egyptian was not mummified. Now, where else can we find mummies?
Mexico.
Also in Egypt.
Mexico, yeah.
No, actually, we find the Egyptian mummies are the most famous because they are the best preserved. Their embalming was the best, but we find mummies all around the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
As a matter of fact,
United States.
huh?
Even here in the United
You will find mummified bodies in the United States. Most of the time when you find them, though, what you find is a body of somebody that died in a desert, very dry desert region, was never found and buried, and the elements simply mummified their bodies. Okay?
Wow.
We saw one
Yeah.
in that one.
If you're ever traveling on I-10, you know what I'm talking about? In fact, there's actually a sign on I-25 when you're coming north about it. When you're on I-10 and you cross over into Arizona, there is a tourist trap there that says, come see
The mummy.
the latest thing.
Oh, yes.
The latest thing, yeah, I think I've seen that.
And when you stop there,
Yes.
we did it once,
Yeah.
we paid our money, and you go through this little hokey museum that says, in this year, this was the latest thing, and it'll have a truck or something. But one of the things they have on display is a mother and daughter of some native tribe, very ancient, mummified. Not mummified by man, mummified by the elements. They died somewhere, were not properly buried, were out in the desert region, they were mummified. The reason why the Egyptians, though, came up and decided to mummify the dead is because their concept, now listen, man has always understood that there is something beyond this life. That's not a recent development. That's not a Jewish development. That's not a Christian development. Man has always understood there is something beyond this life, but the Egyptians felt that for their pharaohs and for their wealthy to go from this life into the next life, they had to have this body to do so.
Because the pharaohs are supposed to be gods.
Because the pharaohs would also become God. That's why they mummified, because you needed this body. What does the Bible tell us that we're going to need in the next life? Do we need this body? No, we get a
Get it.
new,
New.
glorified body. All right. Are you all understanding that this study is not so much about history as it is helping us understand God's Word better?
Amen.
Amen.
All right. All right. Something else that happened in this time frame. Egypt begins to use papyrus. What is papyrus? And no, it's not paper exactly.
It's paper made of reeds.
It's paper, a paper-like product made from the reeds that grew where?
In the Nile.
Along the Nile. How many of you have ever been down around the river and ever seen we used to call them cattails?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Basically the same thing.
Basically kind of the same. They made paper material out of that. What were other parts of the world writing on at this time?
Skin,
Maybe skins,
Yeah.
Stone.
stone. They
Stone.
were chiseling it into stone. Or more accurately,
mud bricks.
they would take mud and they would do their little writing into the mud and let it dry hard. So when they weren't chiseling. Don't think Fred Flintstone, okay? The Fred Flintstone typewriter where the birds
I was
take
gonna
it out.
say like
Okay,
a dope.
they would take and they would have like a thick mud tablet and they would do their writing in it, and then if it needed to be kept permanent, they let it dry.
Would that be like Adobe?
Similar.
Similar like Adobe, yeah.
Inside of caves, they have your paintings and your.
They painted on the rocks as well, yes,
Yeah.
in the cave paintings. But we're talking about as far as writing that they could share. But yes, they did write and they did do the pictures in the cave. Joanne's daughter just went and saw something a week ago.
Yeah.
Fact, that is close to my hometown that I've known about most of my life, and I've never got to go see it. If we do, my dear, if we ever go to see this while we're down there, we're going to go when it's not real hot, and we're going to take water. It's a 2-mile walk. 1 mile to it, 1 mile back. Dad probably did.
Oh, wow.
On the rock, it is chiseled into the rock in a very ancient form of Hebrew writing, the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments. Okay? But here the Egyptians,
It's been there a long time.
it's been there a long time because it's actually in such an ancient form of the Hebrew language that even some who study the language found it very difficult to interpret at first. Okay? Another story. All right. So Egypt begins to use papyrus and ink for writing, And they developed a type of writing that we now know as hieroglyphics, which is a pictorial form of writing. While not the same in appearance, it is a similar thought process to the Chinese pictographs and writings that we discussed on page 15 of this study. That's last lesson. Now, something I did not put in your notes. Were Egyptian hieroglyphics easy to interpret?
To the Egyptians, they were.
No, I'm talking about years later, centuries later.
No, I don't think
For
there's.
centuries,
We had no idea.
they studied them and they couldn't figure it out. I mean, you ever heard of something called the Rosetta Stone?
Yeah.
The Rosetta Stone is a stone that they found, and we'll probably come across this later. This Rosetta Stone was found in, I think it basically Mesopotamia area, if I remember correctly. And on it was some writing from several different ancient languages. And they could read one or two of those languages, so they began to use that as a way to interpret the other languages, including the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and that became the key to unlock that ancient writing for modern man.
So they were easy to read?
Well, not easy, but they began to understand how to read them. Now they can pretty much interpret them. Now, do they always agree? Do two experts always agree exactly on the interpretation? No, but we find that in anything. All right, during this time as well, we're almost in here, Egypt imports vast quantities of gold from other parts of the African continent. And where do we see that showing up in Egyptian culture? Huh? Well, long before Solomon, we see that in the pharaohs. I mean, their coffins, they were always buried in a triple coffin, and one of the three coffins was always gold. They had gold on their headdress. They had gold here. I mean, they used it extensively, just as man always has. But they began to import vast quantities of it from other parts of the African continent. During that same time frame, Egypt domesticates horses. What does that mean? To domesticate an animal means to do what? To tame it, okay? And then here's the last thing. While it is not known for certain, most Bible scholars believe that Job was a contemporary of Abram. What does that mean? He was a contemporary.
Same time period.
He lived in the same time period. Do you think Abram and Job knew each other?
I would say, yeah.
Who knows? Remember,
We don't know.
there's not just this little tiny gathering of people. There's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them. Maybe they knew each other, maybe they didn't.
Yep.
Let me take a quick poll here. Betty, you have probably lived in Clayton longer than anybody? Or Connie, have you lived here longer? Talking about those of us that are here tonight. You've been here most of your life? Have you been here most of your life?
I have too.
You have too? And you have too? Do you know everybody in Clayton? No, you didn't know. Do you know everybody? Yes or no? No. But there's only about 2,500 of us or less. How come you don't know everybody? Because you just really can't get to know that many people. That's why when we say Job was probably a contemporary of Abram, that means he lived in the same time frame. But the chances that they knew each other, maybe, maybe not. Could have. Maybe they traded livestock. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. We don't know for sure. Just as we said at the beginning, Noah was still alive when Abram was born, and Abram was his descendant. But let's face it, how many of you have family members out there that you don't really know? Okay? I've got family members that I used to know when I was a kid that now, if they walked up to me, I probably wouldn't recognize them. I haven't seen them in that long. I don't know them. So again, keep in mind, we're not talking about a tiny little gathering of people when you read the Old Testament passages here. We're talking about one little sliver of what was going on in the entire world. All right? All right, any thoughts, comments, questions?
Way back when, you know, the way United States is formed right now and all these countries, they weren't formed like that before.
Well, no.
So it makes it easy, possibly connections, and that's how people, the Indians and all them, crossed over to another continent.
Well, possible. The whole thing of the continents being one giant continent, I don't think by this time, I think the continents are separated. But there were ways they got here. We remember, we looked in last week's lesson, one of Noah's sons, his line became the maritime people. They sailed. They hit the seas. They weren't afraid to build the ships and take off. There's the other way that some of them got here. Eventually, we know, up near Alaska, between Alaska and Russia. What's it called? It's called the Bering Strait. There's times there's no water covering that. It's a land bridge they can walk across. As a matter of fact, do all of you understand that Russia and the United States are not that far away mile-wise? If you go up to Alaska to the Bering Strait, Alaska and the far part of that Russian is
53 miles.
it 53 miles?
I just saw a post just recently. And it said, think about this, people. Russia is only 53 miles from the United States.
Now, that part of Russia is not heavily populated. Granted. It's very much part of, I think, the Siberian type wilderness, and it's cold, but still, we're that close. Listen, we get it in our heads, and sometimes I think our history books are to blame. I think sometimes for some of us, TV and movies are to blame. We picture those people as being primitive, incapable. I'm going to tell you what, I think they're more capable than we are sometimes.
Yeah.
I think they can,
I think that-
you know, they survived under circumstances that were much different than ours, and they didn't have some of the technology we do, yet look what they did. Okay? If you drive around our town, how many buildings are about to fall in?
Too many.
Too many.
Too many.
And yet you go to Giza, those pyramids are still standing. What's missing from the pyramids that was there originally?
The outer coating,
The outer crust that was of
white limestone,
white limestone.
Yeah.
And why is it missing?
because it was pretty to cook it.
Yeah, most of the main reason it's missing is not because it came to life, but it's because people stole it and used it for other things. Okay? Keep this in mind. Even, listen, you know, and this is not this time frame, but there's a lot of the roads that the Romans built that are still being used over in Europe today. Shoot, I lived here 18 and a half years, and I don't know how many times they've gone around and filled in the potholes in this town because they keep coming back.
Man.
Trying to make them as golf holes.
Sometimes I wish the holes were that big. I might make my putts a little more, I tell you.
I looked up where the Rosetta Stone was found.
Where was it?
It's called a Rosetta Stone because it was found in the little town of Rosetta, which is now El Rashid, which is right outside of Alexandria,
Which you put it in
Egypt.
Egypt,
Right out,
Oh,
right,
okay.
right along the coast.
right along the coast.
It's just-
Okay. And that stone had, was it 4 languages that it was written in?
There's at least 3.
At least 3. And they knew enough of one so that they could start to compare, and that's how then it became. That's why now there's actually a language program that you can buy to learn foreign languages, and it's called Rosetta. For that reason.
Well,
All right. Again, we've only started to the beginning of chapter 12 of Genesis, but listen, we have already covered time-wise more time in history than the rest of the, that's almost equal to the rest of all the Old Testament combined.
wow.
Why didn't God expand on that and let Moses write more of that history? Because it wasn't important to the purpose of the Bible.
The only way they written was in world history.
And world history sometimes doesn't get it right. But does it,
Well,
does
some
it
of them
help?
didn't get it
Does
all.
it help to understand what was going on during this time frame? Okay?
They took lumped in, right?
There was much that was going on in the formation of the world at this time and in future cultures. I mean, Mary, you owe a lot to those ancient Egyptians. You owe a lot to the ancient Egyptians.
Probably because of her.
If they hadn't domesticated the horse, you might not have yours today.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
See, there's a lot of stuff, and see, there's times that we are trying, that it's pounded into our heads that, well, only what's happened in the last few hundred years is really worth considering and knowing about, but the truth is, everything today that we have somehow ties back to that far, far distant past.
That could include art and everything.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, there is some of the artwork, in fact, there are places where they have gone into tombs and into the pyramids and into the tombs of Egypt and places that have been away from the sunlight and from the air, and the artwork is incredible.
Even music.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we looked and all, we saw that before the flood, there was the one that he was the father of those that played musical instruments. You understand that somewhere along the line, one of Noah's sons had to learn that, or one of their wives, and it got passed on again. All right. Next week, we will begin to look at Abraham. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how we'll approach this. We're going to begin to look now at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and see what was going on in the world during their lifetimes. And we'll look at Abram's and Isaac's interaction with Egypt and with some others that they interact with. All right? All right. Betty, will you dismiss us in prayer? And pray that we'll have a great rest of the week.